then I'll give you about an hour or so of lab time to review and study, since we didn't have lab at the end of lecture on Tuesday. And then we'll take the quiz about 2. Okay, so I'll lecture for about half an hour, and then about an hour of lab time, and then we'll take the quiz at 2, and then come back and start the venous system, okay, through the veins. So, your quiz will cover identifying vessels such as arteries or arterioles or veins, and then the arteries that we talked about on Tuesday. So the ascending aorta, aortic arch, and thoracic and abdominal aorta and their branches, but not any farther past what we talked about on Tuesday. Okay? So the lower limb that and the pelvis that I'm covering now won't be on the quiz. Okay? So the pelvis is supplied by branches of the internal iliac artery. And I'm going to put the end of my aorta way up here. And the abdominal aorta ends by forming, I'm just going to write the names on the board here rather than stick to the numbers. It's easier. Abdominal aorta. And then it ends by forming 2 branches, left and right, common iliac. Remember on Tuesday when we talked about the common carotid, it ended by forming external and internal carotids. And so the same with our common iliac. It will end by forming internal iliac, and the internal iliac supplies oxygenated blood to the pelvic organs. So we're talking bladder, uterus, seminal vesicle, prostate gland, vagina, lower, middle, and lower rectum. All of those are supplied by branches of the internal iliac artery. And we're going to look at a few of those. All right? So, internal iliac artery, and then the rest of the common iliac is now called external iliac. Okay, and we'll follow it down into the leg as the femoral artery in just a moment. But remember, the internal iliac is going down into the pelvis. So here's our reproductive model from the female. And this would be the aorta up here. And this would be the common iliac artery. Okay? Continuing along the brim to the edge of the pelvis as the external iliac, but coming down into the pelvis as the internal iliac. So it's following where the sciatic nerve components are, all the ventral sacral rami coming into the pelvis. All of these, this first portion right here is the internal iliac, and all these are branches of the internal iliac. So let me just, it's not shown on this side, well, I guess it is. Let me just pass this around so you guys can just take a look at it and get a better idea. And so pass it towards the middle, along the wall, and then both of those can end up in the middle. All right? So let me show you a couple of additional images. These are not on the PowerPoint slides because I just pulled them off the internet last night. And turn the light off. All right, so here's the aorta. This is looking from the back because our descending colon coming from the rectum is on the left side, not the right side. All right, so you're looking at somebody from the back. And here's the sigmoid colon and rectum. Here would be the inferior mesenteric artery, giving its superior rectal branch to the top. It's called superior hemorrhoidal, but it's really a superior rectal artery. To the top of the rectum. And here is the common iliac, giving rise to internal iliac and external iliac. All right, so remember you're looking from the back. Everybody kind of oriented here? Okay? And so internal iliac is coming down into the pelvis, and it's giving off these various branches. So this branch right here is going to the middle of the rectum, and it's called the middle rectal artery. Okay? Other branches are going to go in front of the rectum, and they'll go to the bladder or the uterus or both, if it's a female. Here is the internal pudendal artery coming off, and as it's going forward, it gives off these branches, which are inferior rectal. This name's a little early. This is really internal pudendal and inferior rectal down here, underneath the levator ani, going to the anus. All right, so let's look at a couple more pictures, and then I'll diagram it on the board. This is a sagittal section similar to that model that's going around. All right, so here's the sacrum. Here is the internal iliac coming down into the pelvis. And here is the obturator artery, which is going to go through the obturator foramen into the medial thigh. And then we have branches that are going to out the pelvis to the gluteal muscles. And then these branches that are coming forward, one to the bladder. This is probably the middle rectal here, and they just go down the side of the internal pelvic wall. All right? You can't see the organs, however, in that view. Now you can. So again, aorta, common iliac, internal iliac, and external iliac. All right? Internal iliac is off these branches that are going to the muscles in the buttocks. Here's the obturator artery going out. Here you can see is a branch going to the bladder. All right. Here's a branch going to the uterus, uterine artery. And here's a branch going to the rectum, the middle rectal. All right. So it's named for the organ that it goes to. And then one of these goes out and it comes back in as the internal pudendal. And the internal pudendal gives rise to the inferior rectal. This is out of Netter's book. Almost everything I pulled off the internet today is fuzzy. It's like somebody tweaked a little button that doesn't want me to copy it. So I didn't make it as big as I could have. But I can show it to you in Netter's during lab, or if you have Netter's yourself. So this is, again, looking from the back. All right? Here's descending colon and rectum. Here's internal rectal, internal iliac. Here's internal pudendal coming down, and you saw it right here in the male pelvic models. Remember the pudendal nerve that you could see near the transverse the external urethral sphincter? So this is internal pudendal, but it gives off a branch to the anus, and that's inferior rectal. Okay? Middle rectal and superior rectal. So we have these three locations, and when we look at the veins later today, we have superior rectal veins, middle rectal veins, and internal rectal veins that are going to form hemorrhoids. And we'll look at those images a little bit later. So let me diagram. This is probably one that makes the most sense. So you don't have to know all of those branches. What you need to know for lecture is that the blood supply to these pelvic organs comes from the internal iliac artery. Okay? And then the middle of when we talk about tracing, when we do the veins, I'll be a little bit more specific as far as which are the internal and external iliac veins. So here would be internal iliac artery. And again, the veins that we'll talk about later will be exactly the same place. If you were to take an upper division course, you would talk about anterior and posterior divisions of the internal iliac artery and which branches come off of which division. We're not going to worry about that, okay? So don't worry about which one comes off first and which one comes off next. What's important is where it ends up, all right? So an early branch off of the internal iliac passes forward along the medial wall of the pelvis and out the obturator foramen. Remember the obturator foramen was? It's formed by the pubic and ischial bones. And so the obturator foramen on the front of the pelvis. The obturator nerve passes through, obturator artery passes through that, and it supplies the medial thigh. And the best location to see it, you can see it on the pelvis going around, but we have a lot of other vessels associated with it. You can't see it on our lower limb because of the fact that there's no pelvis. You see this kid falling apart, so let me cradle. Make sure nothing else is coming off. So here's that common iliac, internal iliac, the pelvis, external iliac, going under the inguinal ligament, okay, right here. Now these are all branches of the internal iliac. Right here, so when it comes along the rim of the pelvis, is the obturator artery, okay? And that's going to supply the muscles of the medial thigh. So I don't know if you learned the obturator nerve last semester, but it passes with the obturator artery through the obturator foramen, that's the yellow structure. It supplies adductor muscles, adductor longus and magnus. Okay, so that's obturator artery. And it would be this one right here. So when this pelvis is going around, it's the well with the white nerve going along the brim of the pelvis. That's the obturator artery. Okay? Now if I ask it on the quiz or an exam, I sometimes show it with an x-ray where the blood vessel has radioactive dye in it, and you can actually see it passing through the opening of the bone, the obturator foramen. Okay? All right, now you'll see that's this one right here. Okay, it's actually, this is the other side, mine slipped around. But this would be the obturator artery right here. And you can see that part of the internal iliac goes behind all these muscles and supplies the posterior muscles. So those are gluteal arteries, which you don't have to know, so I'm just going to show that branch disappearing. There, now it's gone. And then we have the internal iliac continuing, and it's going to send vessels to the organs in the pelvis. If it's female, there'll be a uterine artery. If it's male, one of these goes to the bladder. All right? So we'll just choose one of these here to go to the middle rectum. If I ask you to identify a middle rectal artery, you will see it going to the rectum. Okay, it won't just be an artery, a wire sticking out of space. So you'll see it going to the rectum, okay, or the inferior rectal artery. Then we have a branch that goes outside of the pelvis and comes forward to the perineal area. And this is the internal pudendal artery. And it's going to continue forward towards the penis and towards the clitoris. But branches from it will go to the anal canal and will be the inferior rectal artery. And you'll see exactly the same pattern in the veins, but in the reverse. Okay? Probably the clearest picture of that. So here is the anal canal. Here would be inferior rectal artery, draining into internal pudendal artery, draining into internal iliac artery, draining into common iliac artery. Okay? Here is middle rectal artery, draining into internal iliac artery, draining into common iliac artery. Here is superior rectal artery, draining into inferior mesenteric artery, draining into abdominal aorta. So we have those patterns. Let me put this one up on D2L so you have a copy of it, and this one, okay? This one is too blurry. But if you have netters, You can you can look at the one that we have here in the classroom. All right, so that's the branches of the pelvis. And now we'll look at the blood supply to the lower extremity itself.
Is the inferior rectal artery the one that's more
Going,
superior? Or?
It's branching off of internal pudendal.
Okay.
Okay?
So after the split, the lower is still considered the internal pudendal?
Yeah, so this whole thing, the internal, technically, not really, it's called the superior, the superficial and deep perineal, but we're not worried about that. But this is going to continue on towards the external urethral sphincter and the clitoris or penis. So this was our model that we looked at, and we saw the pudendal nerve here. Okay, so this is the anus right here, levator ani, and the obturator internus is here, covered by a muscle. So internal pudendal artery is coming here along the side here, and going towards, in this case it's male, so going towards the penis. All right. Inferior rectal isn't shown here, but it would be cutting across that gap. So coming off the internal pudendal, across that gap, which is filled with adipose tissue, and going to the anal canal would be inferior rectal. Okay. The middle rectal would be going to the rectum above the levator ani. Okay. So the others will show that. If you have questions during lab, I can show that to you in a little bit more detail. All right, so I'm going to take the right side and draw the lower extremity vessels off of that. So we still have common iliac and internal iliac, and the rest of that is going to be external iliac, just like we have on the left side. And when that goes under the inguinal ligament, it becomes the femoral artery. So the inguinal ligament is not the inguinal canal. Here's the pelvis, and this is the inguinal ligament. So it's a band of connective tissue from the top of the iliac crest to the pubic bone. So when the femoral artery goes under that, it now changes, when the external iliac artery goes under that, it now changes name and becomes the femoral artery. Okay, so as soon as it passes through that gap. On our leg model, just make sure that's on here. On the leg model, here's the inguinal ligament. Here would be the external iliac artery. As soon as we see it underneath the inguinal ligament, this is now the femoral artery. Okay, so it's just like our clavicles as we change the name from subclavian to axillary. So now it comes down into the thigh and it passes medial. I'm going to make it short so I can draw the leg on there. And this is femoral artery. Or femoral, I don't care how you put your syllables. As it passes medially, as you can see here, it disappears. And it goes into the adductor magnus, that big muscle in the medial posterior aspect of the thigh. It's still the femoral artery while it's passing through the muscle. As soon as we see it reappear in the back of the thigh, it's now called the popliteal or popliteal artery. Okay? So I'm going to draw that as a dotted line to indicate that we're looking through the leg and we're seeing something that is posterior. So here is the back of the knee. As it runs along the back of the knee, our biceps femoris and semimembranosus and semitendinosus form this diamond shape. And then the gastric medius comes in again like this, and so we can see the popliteal artery in that diamond fossa behind the knee. So we'll draw a dotted line, or I'll draw a dotted line, and that's the popliteal artery. Okay? from 2 to 3 inches below the knee, a branch is given off, all right? You can see it from the back here. This branch goes between the tibia and the fibula through the membrane that joins those two bones together. And now we'll see it on the front of the leg. The rest of the artery continues to travel down the back of the leg. So on this model, you can see the artery going right down the back of the leg, not under the skin, but deep to the gastrocnemius and soleus muscles. Okay, that's the posterior tibial artery. The one that goes through the membrane, we now see behind the anterior tibial muscle, and that's the, guess what? Anterior tibial artery, okay? That's going to end up on top of the foot. Posterior tibial ends up on the bottom of the foot. So posterior tibial continues on down the back of the leg. And anterior tibial is going to come through the membrane, travel down the front of the leg, and onto the top of the foot. So I drew it in a solid line because we're seeing it on the front now. Dorsalis pedis is after it passes the medial malleolus, and we see it on the top of the foot. It's a hard pulse to find. We'll try to find it on Tuesday. You can try to find it over the weekend. It's medial. So between your foot and your big toe, try to feel along that area and see if you can find a pulse. And then this one is a posterior tibial artery. Now we have 3 compartments in the leg. When we talked about muscles, we had the anterior compartment. That's going to be supplied by anterior tibial artery. We have the posterior compartment, gastrocnemius, posterior tibialis. That's going to be supplied by the posterior tibial artery. And then remember we had a lateral compartment, fibularis brevis or longus, or you may have known it as peroneus brevis or longus. That keeps your foot from underpronating, from rolling over, all right? And so we have a lateral branch coming from the posterior tibial artery. It doesn't go to the bottom of the foot, it just goes to the ankle, the lateral malleolus. And so this lateral branch coming off of the posterior tibial, not the anterior tibial, but off the posterior tibial, is our fibular, or if you call it peroneus brevis, you can call it the peroneal artery. Makes more sense to call it fibular because it's running along the fibula, which is the lateral bone. Okay. Now we have just 2 more vessels, the ones that are on the bottom of the foot. What's the bottom of the foot called? The plantar surface or the dorsal surface? Plantar surface. So the vessels on the bottom of the foot are known as the plantar arteries. I'm not going to take my socks off and draw on my foot, all right? But we'll pretend my hand is the foot. This is my big toe. So coming in, I'm going to a basketball game tonight, so the colors are red, so I don't, okay. So coming down the back of the leg, the posterior tibial artery goes around the medial side of the ankle, onto the foot, to the big toe. That's the medial plantar artery. And then also branching off of the posterior tibial artery and going to the little toe is the lateral plantar artery. So we're going to have one artery coming to the bottom of the foot and then 2 branches off of that one artery. Okay? So posterior tibial artery going to the big toe is medial plantar. Posterior tibial artery going to the little toe is lateral plantar. Okay? And that's the lower extremity. Now the reason the lateral plantar artery is shown going off at such an angle is because our posterior tibial is coming in on the medial side of the foot. All right, so if we look at our foot, I know it's a funny foot, but medial plantar is going to be coming in like this. Posterior tibial is going to be coming in like this. Go to the big toe as the medial plantar. And go over to the little toe as the lateral plantar. Okay? Now, later today when we do the veins, by the way, this morning I didn't get to fetal circulation, and I'd already covered this on Tuesday with them, so we'll do fetal circulation on Tuesday at the very beginning of class. All right, we'll start with veins today. So why don't you go ahead and have lab, and we'll do the quiz of the histology, 1 question, 5 questions on the arteries to the aorta. The last branches of the aorta, the lumbar arteries, and anterior mesenteric artery that we talked about, that's where the quiz will stop. Okay? The veins that we will cover, by the way, are exactly the same name and same position as those that I have up there for the arterial system. With the lower limb, we add 2 superficial veins, but everything else looks exactly the same like that. I'll just draw it in blue. And I'll start from the bottom and go up. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. Question?
You said we had to decipher histology.
So I have a picture of, I have 3 pictures. Capillary, artery, vein, arterial. I did put venual up there because that could be a little tricky. Okay? And then just name it. Okay?
And that's just artery, not the specific.
Correct. Muscular is elastic as a lecture concept. I don't have to do it histology.
Okay. Simple artery.
Yeah. I was going to ask if someone's running that for John.